Hi folks, I'm Denny Brauer, and I want to welcome you to what I feel is one of the finest flipping and pitching and deep water jigging segments that we've ever put together. I think in this segment you're going to find some things that are definitely going to help make you a better fisherman. Stay tuned for what I feel is one of the most action-packed flipping, pitching, and jigging films that we've ever done. Oh, yes! Took off for that deep water. Come on those wings. I've got the worst job in the world. I really do. I mean, look at my hand already. Look at, they're tearing it up. And here I've got this bass that he's wanting me to do the same thing. He's wanting me to unhook it. Come on, jump, get off of there. Do it yourself. I'm tired of unhooking these fish. I bet you folks hate it when you have that problem. What's going to surprise you is we're filming this video on public water. I know you've seen a lot of fishing shows and probably a lot of videos, and a lot of them get shot on private ponds and phosphate pits and places where fishing's real easy. Well, fishing is real easy today, but we've hit it right, and we've actually hit it on a public body of water, a place where any of you can go out fishing. And we're doing it at a time of the year that's, in my opinion, not the best to really be showing you this technique. We're doing it during the warmer months. We're looking at water temperature that's running anywhere from 85 to 90 in some of these shallows. And I know a lot of the bigger fish are forced out deeper, and we can back off these points with a jig, and we've shown you some of that action and catch some of those bigger fish. I would love it if we could catch a 5 to 7, 8 pound fish every flip up here shallow, but that's not really the intent of this here video. The intent is to show you some pointers, to show you the techniques, and hopefully make you a better fisherman. And I think we've hit it right. I mean, with this many fish catches, if you don't get an idea how I make most of my money, you never will. Whoa, fish! What are you trying to do? I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get away, aren't you? Oh, that's a pretty bass right there. About a 3.5 pounder, ain't that, old Jig? Catch another one before the wind blows us away. There's one. Whoa, come here, dog. That's a nice fish there. Right in that little weed point. Come here. I want to talk to you a little more. There we go. There's a pretty bass. Look at how he's hooked. Look down that big old mouth. Got him right in the roof of the mouth there, right where he's supposed to be hooked. There we go. Good old flipping fish. Doesn't get to be a whole lot more fun than that, folks. If you don't like flipping, you probably don't like fishing. Nice little fish. That's a good way to start the morning. Nice little old jig fish. Yeah, that's a pretty one. Oh, that jig. Come here. Yeah. Oh, that's a fat fish. That's probably 2.5 pound fish. There he is again. Oh, there's a big one. There. Oh, he acts like he's the king of the pack. Jump for us. Jump, jump. I know you'll come off if you jump, but I want to see you. Come on. Yes. Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Where are you going? Which side are you coming? Yeah. We are having fun now. Come on, jump again for the camera. We don't care if you get away. We're going to let you go anyway. Come on. Oh, you're too big. You're too big. Oh, come to me. Yes. You are a beauty. There's one. He was right in the weeds. That's a pretty one. That's a chameleon brown jig. We're in an area here where the water's a little colder, or a little clearer, I should say. And I switched to that brown. Brown's just a little better clear water color than the black and blue for me. Probably my number one flipping pitching bait is a jig. It's probably the number one bait in history of bass fishing as far as amount of dollars won and numbers of big fish caught. It's just a dynamite bait. It's my personal confidence bait, and there's reasons for that. When I'm fishing a bait right in the middle of heavy cover, it's easier for me to shoot that jig because it's a compact bait into a small hole a lot easier than a big old lizard or a worm. And plus, it just seems to attract bigger strikes. And boy, big fish make me money, and I don't think any of you folks would be unhappy with catching the biggest fish you ever caught. So I'm going to talk a little bit about jigs, the different weights, the colors, what I use for trailers on them, and then we'll talk about some of the other flipping baits. But let's start with the jig. If I had one color to choose from, that would be it right there, black and blue. For some reason, all around the United States, a lot of the watercolor we fish is conducive to using a bait that color. Very, very good color choice. Dirty water, my first choice of color, since we're on color, would be that right there, Texas crawl. It's black, got a little bit of chartreuse, a little bit of pumpkin tied in, and that's become a real, real favorite. There's another good choice, black with bright chartreuse yellow can be a good dirty water color. For those of you in the southern part of the country, especially in the springtime of the year, Texas is a renowned area for using a black jig with this hot pink or red, what we call Texas red in there. In fact, we just come out with a bright red jig just for that situation. So keep in mind the area you're fishing. At times there's a local favorite, a local color. Don't be afraid to match it. It'll help you catch a few more fish. This is another example, white. Years ago, nobody fished a white jig unless they were fishing for stripers. Now everybody's fishing a white jig for bass, especially around vegetation and clear water when they're feeding on shad. This emulates a shad real good, so that's a good color choice to have in your tackle box. We've already covered the black and blue. Now let's cover natural colors. These are the clear water colors. Your pumpkins, your pumpkin greens. This is what we call a chameleon crawfish. It's my favorite clear water color. It's also a good color when fish are around boat docks in clear water during the summertime when they're feeding on bluegill. Because if you put a kind of a trailer that'll match that pumpkin green trailer behind there, it actually looks like a bluegill in the water when you're swimming it. If you're fishing on the bottom, it looks like a crawdad. So a lot of these colors, it depends on what zone you're fishing them in, how effective they're going to be. But as you can see in my tackle box, those are the basic colors I carry, and I just match the color to the time of year and to the water color and take it from there. As far as weights, I've got a zone in my tackle box here of 1/4 ounce, I've got a zone of 3/8, and I've got a little area that I've got a 1/2 ounce. Once in a great while, I'll have a need for a 1 ounce jig, and that's, say I'm in the southern part of the country where there's matted vegetation all across the water. And I've run into this actually up north too on a few lakes, to where I've got to punch the jig down through that mat of grass. Then that 1 ounce jig can be very, very handy. So keep that in mind. But what to look for in jigs as far as style, I like this type of head. It just seems to come through the brush easier without getting hung up. It comes through the vegetation very well. I like the line tie turned sideways like that. I feel it allows you to hook a higher percentage of fish. And this is the new jig that I designed for Strike King. It's the Denny Brauer Pro model, and it's that way for a reason, to put more fish in the boat. The weed guard is a very flexible weed guard. It's got a tournament grade weed guard in it, which allows you to come through the brush, but it will flex to where if that fish just barely bites down on it, you're going to be able to hook him. I've got a big double rattle on the back of this bait that makes a tremendous amount of noise. I'm sure you can hear that over the microphone. And on the back of the rattle, I've got a little spur there, almost like a spur on a worm hook, so that when you're using soft plastic and you thread that crawdad on there, that spur helps keep your plastic from sliding down. A neat, neat feature. This particular hook is a good needlepoint mustad hook, and a good way to test whether your jig hooks are right is just put them on your fingernail. And if they'll slide, they're not sharp enough. If they'll stick, they're ready to fish. You want a needle point. You don't want a cutting edge. A cutting edge, when you set the hook with heavy line, will cut a big hole in the fish's mouth. You need something that'll stick. So stick with those needle point hooks, and I think you'll be a little bit happier. But rattles, you know, when to use them, when are they good, when are they bad? Right now, I'm using them 100% of the time. I think they're an advantage. Now, once every fisherman in America gets to throwing rattles, then maybe there will become a time in the future where a quiet jig will generate more strikes. But right now, this is the only jig I'm fishing. It's got that big old rattle in there, and I can really use it in that heavy cover to help attract fish. Okay, what do I put behind these baits? I never fish a jig by itself. I know there's some anglers that do, but personally, I feel that it's naked without something on behind it. My number one choice of all is that right there. That is the junior size Strike King Bow Hog. You put it on behind the jig, and it's probably the size of the average crawdad that swims in the water. How do you hook them? That's always been a question that I get asked a lot at seminars. Do you go through the fat first, or do you go through the hide first? I like to go through the fat first. You just find that hole there, and you slip it in. That way you've got the fatty part down. I think it looks more natural that way. And with these two-tone frogs, like this black and blue one, you've got the dark side up. And if you stop and think about it, about everything I know of that swims in the water, its lighter side is its belly, whether it's a bluegill, a crawdad, a shad, and you want that down. It's going to look more natural, this lighter side down, plus it's going to have better action. It's not going to ball up as bad. It'll help you hook more fish. Speaking of balling up, I'm sure everybody that's fished jigs has had a problem where they've set the hook and they come back, the fish got off, and there they were. Their hook was buried right into their pork frog. Since we've got this rattle on the shank of the hook, it actually keeps the pork frog back on the bend where that very, very seldom happens. If you're not using my jig, a little tip is just get a piece of plastic worm about 1 inch long, slip it on to the shank of your jig, then put your pork frog on, and it'll keep it back here where it belongs. But I think that'll help you catch more fish. But that's my favorite size pork trailer right there. Real cold water where I want to slow it down, and I'm in an area where there's some great big old fish, then I'll go to the senior cut of pork, which is a bigger cut, slows the bait down even more as it falls, has a little bit more action. But in cold water, I like to stick to the frog type cut. I don't want a bait that's got a whole lot of action because the metabolism of the bass is so slow. They're not in a chasing mood, and they know something that's got a lot of action is not natural. Now, once the water warms up and it gets hot, there's a little trailer out called the Strike King Pigtail. It's got these action legs, and they actually swim as it's going to the bottom. It looks very natural, and I probably use it more than any other cut of pork or any other trailer during the warmer months of the year when I'm jig fishing. Neat, neat, neat trailer. Those are the 3 cuts of pork I stick with. I don't experiment any further than that. The only thing I will do different, once in a while when I want to match up a certain color, say I want some bright chartreuse that I want to add to this here particular jig, I will use one of these regular old big claw crawdads. I usually snip it off right there where it changes from a worm body to a crawdad body. I'll just pinch it off and shorten it up. The reason I want it shorter like that is I don't want it way out behind the bait where they have an opportunity to just nip the pinchers. Slide it up there about a 1/2 inch, thread it in behind that rattle. Look at how neat of a bait that makes. You're ready to go fishing. And you don't have to worry about the pork drying out. So this is a favorite combination amongst a lot of people during warmer weather when you're jig fishing, is to go to some type of plastic trailer rather than pork. I do, however, think that a fish will hang on to pork longer. They probably like it a little better, so under tough conditions, you probably are better off using the pork. But this gives you more options color-wise, and you can get into all different colors. Here's the color I was talking about when I'm trying to emulate a bluegill. I think that imitates it about as perfect as anything. You take one of these jigs like that and put in front of it, and you've got a pretty good bluegill combination. Or if you're working it and crawling it on the bottom in real clear water, it probably looks like a natural colored crawfish. So don't be afraid to mix it up. You can see my selection of different plastic trailers I've got here. I even have them in different sizes. You can see the difference between the 4-inch and the 3-inch right there. Real tough conditions. If you're fishing some of the river systems where there's not a lot of big fish, bites are hard to get, I would probably downsize to the 3-inch and actually trim the jig down. And this is something a lot of people don't do as far as trimming jigs. You can bunch the skirt up and you can cut the skirt off basically at the back end of the hook. I just make kind of a little semicircle cut. I also come up here to the weed guard, cut the top corner off that weed guard so it's a little more compact, and that makes a smaller profile bait, and I think you end up hooking more fish. And that's really about as extensive and complicated as I try to make my jig fishing. These are the 2 boxes I carry, one completely full of jigs, another completely full of plastic trailers, and I also got a crate of different colored pork frogs that I carry for certain situations. And then I keep experimenting during the day. If one thing's not working, try something else. Something I've really noticed that makes a difference is in cold water, the speed of fall of the bait when you're flipping. There's times they won't hit it if it goes zoomed to the bottom. They want that slow fall. Warm weather, there's times they won't hit it if it's too slow. They want it getting to the bottom in a hurry. They want that reaction strike. So experiment with different weights. Keep in mind when you're flipping and pitching, how that bait is falling is just as important as when you're crankbaiting on how fast you're reeling. There's no difference. It's just a difference in a horizontal versus a vertical. So if you keep that in mind, I think you're going to catch more fish. There we go. Boy, I saw the weeds move there. That was a neat deal. You're a fighter. Come aboard. Yes. You folks want to pay attention to when you're flipping weeds like this, and if you see the weed shake next to your bait, a lot of times it's an indication that the fish has turned and moved to the bait. So really be prepared for your line to take off after that happens. Yes, sir, he was buried right up in them. Even though it's early in the morning, a lot of times they like to seek out that cover. Had that little pigtail trailer on the back of there that has that action as it falls. He just couldn't handle that. It looked too much like supper to him, or breakfast, I guess. Folks, what we've got here is probably one of the best examples of great flipping cover you could ever ask for. We've got 2 laying down trees coming off the bank that cross, forming an excellent sanctuary for a bass to hide, to ambush prey, whatever. But if you can find places like this on your lake, those are excellent situations to flip and pitch jigs, worms, or whatever the bait may be, right into the middle of. These bass get in there for the shade. They're hiding, waiting to ambush the bait fish, the crawfish, or whatever that's coming by. So don't be afraid to get in there where they live. Laying down trees are great, great places to flip and pitch, especially after cold fronts. If you get a cold front situation that comes into your lake, a great tip is to go to wood. For some reason, fish like to go to that wood and hold there tight. A lot of times it takes several flips real close into the target, but usually the key spot is the heaviest piece of the exact piece of cover. For this two trees here, it'd be right where they cross. Right there where the two trees intersect would probably be where the biggest bass lives. Now, if you've got dropping water conditions on your lake, move out to the end of the tree. That's probably where the fish is going to be. If the lake's coming up, move on in shallower and get closer to the bank. Do exactly what the lake level's doing, and you're probably going to catch more fish. Another great fishing situation, folks, is wherever you have wood mixed in with weeds. Weeds are great cover, wood's great cover. When you have the two together, it makes it a special spot. It's like a magnet to the bass. Something else you might want to look for is where you have a weed bed end and it turns into bare bank. A lot of times the fish will set up right there where you have that edge. Once in a while it could be big rocks turning into small rocks. But anytime you have a change, pay a lot of attention because that's where you're going to get a lot of your bites. And also where your weeds make a point. Those fish will relate to the points, they'll relate to the pockets. When you get that bite, pay a lot of attention on, what was the situation? Was that fish on the outside of the weeds, the inside? Did the weeds make a point? Did they make a pocket? Was it back in a bay? Was it out on the main lake? You start to put all those things together and you will catch more fish. There's a good one. Come here. Right in the middle of those weeds. Yeah, that's a nice flipping fish right there. Pretty fish. A little tip, folks. When you catch those fish, most of us are releasing them nowadays. Always grab them by the jaw like that. That way you don't take a lot of slime off them. You don't hurt that fish. You can unhook him, put him right back in, and he's going to be a lot bigger the next time you catch him. Another good tip for places to look for to find those bass is you can see how we have the overhanging branches coming off the bank where it makes that little shaded area. Shade is just a great place for bass to gang up, especially on bright sunny days. A lot of times you'll be going down a bank and it'll be all sunny and then you get to a little section that's shady. Right where you have the contrast where it goes from the sun to the shade is an excellent place to look for fish. And if you just happen to have a laying down tree in that shade, that makes it double good again. You get a combination of cover. Let's see if we can't catch one out of it. Well, you talk about a perfect pitching place. Right there where those logs come off the bank where it's shaded. That is about as nice as it can get. Right there. Make it hit the water soft. Let it go straight to the bottom on a slack line. Pick up and feel if he's there. If he's not, shake it a couple times. Work it through the branches. If you don't get a bite, bring it on out and put it into the next little hole in the cover where you think he might be hiding. Don't be afraid to get right in the middle of that stuff. That's why we use heavy line in the flipping and pitching technique, so that we can winch them out of there. You got to go where they're living because a lot of times they're not going to come to the bait. You got to go to them. Well, there should be one living there. He's probably living there whether he wants to bite or not. It's the deal. A lot of times I'll make a pitch or a flip into an area where I know that there's no way I can get the fish out. But if I can get him to bite and get him hooked, a lot of times I can take the boat into him and then figure out how to get him. What we got here is we've got a stump that's sitting right out from the grass, and I'd pitched a black and blue jig in there and had a fish hit it real hard, but didn't take it. So something you need to try when a fish hits a bait like that and doesn't get it is switch to a different color. I switched to white, maybe he'll hit that. Maybe he didn't like that black and blue. Once in a while you just need to lay the jig down and pick a spinner bait up or a topwater bait and give that fish a different look. Once you locate him, don't leave him until you try several different changes of baits, changes of colors in order to try to catch him. And then if that doesn't work, don't be afraid to come back an hour later. He may be more in the mood to eat the bait rather than just bump it. One other little thing you might try when those fish are hitting them baits short or just bumping them and dropping them and not taking them is get some scent and put scent on that bait. I think it really makes a difference, especially for the bigger fish. It makes the bait a little slicker. It'll come through the cover easier. It reflects light. It's more slimy and it'll reflect light like something that's natural in the water. And I think they hang on to it a little longer. So whenever they're short striking, I drowned it into some scent. And boy, it makes a lot of difference on the number of strikes I get. Another little thing that I'll do since I fish tournaments is right before a tournament, I'll take a jar of pork frog and empty a little of that formula that they put in to preserve it, and put some scent in there and let that pork absorb that scent. And I think it probably cuts back on the life of the pork, but it'll sure get you more strikes. Jump, you little bass, jump. You don't like that hook in your mouth. He was out there. I pulled it away from the weeds, and come on, there you go. Boy, he flat inhaled it. A nice little bass. I remember many tournaments I could have used one like this. There we go. Just like going to the dentist, isn't it? Well, that's a healthy little fish. About a 2-pounder. Let's see if we can get another one. He probably come off the end of that log right there. I was just working the jig out from the weeds in the log. Flipping, pitching, jig fishing. I think equipment's very, very important. I know back in the years when I was a fishing guide, there were a lot of people who were using the wrong equipment, and it really kept them from catching a high percentage of fish. So I'm going to go through and tell you about the equipment I use, when I use it, how I use it, and why I think it will give you an advantage. And I think a good place to start is with the rod. I pretty much settled on a 7.5-foot rod for flipping and pitching. I think it's a comfortable length for me. I'm a pretty good sized person. If you're a little shorter, you might want a littler rod, but I wouldn't get caught up in using too short a rod, because you really need the leverage to get the fish out of the heavy cover, and the longer rod will actually let you get a little more distance in your flipping and pitching. Naturally, in tournaments, the longest length we can use is 8 foot, so we are limited there, but 7.5 foot's a good choice. Do not go shorter than 6.5. Action-wise, I know a lot of my fellow anglers out there use real stiff rods to flip with, and I'm not saying that's wrong. Everybody has different arm strength and different speed at setting the hook. I like a little bit of a loose tip in the rods that I use, and this is what I call an 80-20 action. 80% of this rod is pretty stiff, and the last 20% has got a little flex to it. And that really allows me to do a couple of things. Number one, if I'm flipping, I'm fishing real close to the fish. And there's a lot of impact there when I set the hook. If that big old 5-pound fish is in that brush pile and I jerk hard and there's no give, something's going to happen. Either I'm going to end up tearing a bigger hole in the fish's mouth and he's probably going to jump and shake the bait, or I'm going to break my line. It's usually a negative situation. So what that rod's doing is giving me a little bit of a shock absorber, which helps cushion that hook set, and then the backbone takes hold to punch the hook in the rest of the way, and you still end up, I think, landing a higher percentage of fish. The other thing that I think the flexible rod allows you to do is get more distance pitching. If you're using a real stiff rod, you end up just lobbing the bait. But with a little bit of flex in that tip, it actually acts as kind of a spring to fling that bait out there, and it's just more comfortable to fish with. I can flip with this rod, I can pitch with this rod, and I can cast. And I actually end up using this same rod a lot of times when I'm fishing deep structure. And in this video, you're going to see some of the deeper brush pile fishing, fishing on stumps off of points, some of the summertime jig fishing patterns that I'm using the same rod for that I actually flip and pitch with. Now, we will be fishing a lake that the water is fairly stained. If I was on a real clear body of water and had a downsized lines and go to lighter fishing line, I would go to a little lighter action rod. And then I drop down to a 6.5-foot rod because it doesn't give me quite as much leverage and I'm not as apt to break that lighter line. By light line, I'm usually talking no lighter than 10-pound test. 10 to 14-pound test line is light line for jig fishing and casting. When I'm in the flipping situation, I very seldom ever go with lighter than 20-pound test because I'm putting it into heavy cover and I need the strength to get the fish out of there. Once in a great while, in a clear water situation, boat docks that do not have a lot of cover, you might want to downsize to 17. But if the water's dirty and we're in the middle of those brush piles, I've usually got 25 or 30-pound test line on. I like the monofilament. Some people like the braided lines. That's a matter of choice. But with the monofilaments, I stick to the 25 and 30 in dirty water. Line color, that's endless. It's really what you prefer. I like clear line in the clearer water. I can still see it pretty good. If I'm fishing a lake that's got a lot of vegetation in it,
I'm fishing green line, the regular old moss green line, because it matches the vegetation, and I think it's harder for the fish to see. In flipping and pitching, because especially in flipping where it's a dirty water situation, I don't think it matters if you use fluorescent line. If that's what it takes for you to see that line and to determine when you're getting a strike, go ahead and use it. Okay, we've talked about the rod, we've talked about the reel, we've talked about the line. The reel is another important thing. In flipping and pitching, I prefer bait casting equipment. I think it gives you more control. I've seen anglers use spinning equipment and are very good with it. But I like the leverage that a bait casting reel gives me. This particular reel is 6.3 to 1. It's got it'll pick a lot of line up in a hurry. That's an advantage, as you will see during this tape, where we have some fish hit the bait and actually run at the boat. Being able to take that line up to catch up to that fish and set the hook is very important. So a high-speed reel can be an advantage. If you're a tournament angler, another place that's an advantage is, say you pitch over here to a stump, let it go to the bottom, shake it a couple times, and don't get a bite. Boy, you can get it back in a hurry and get it into the next spot. And at the end of the day, because you're using a high-speed reel, you're probably going to get more presentations in than your fellow competitors. So equipment does have advantages, but the key is find what works for you. If you're losing fish, having trouble placing the bait where you want to, whatever, it's time to look at some of the equipment that we use because we make our living with it. But if everything's going good, you're able to get that lure where you want to, you're landing a high percentage of your fish, you're not breaking lines, stick with what you're using because you're doing things right. Come out from underneath that boat! What are you trying to do to me? Come here, darling. Quit that fighting. Yeah, oh, that's a nice one. Yeah! Come here. We are having fun now. Come here. Give up the fight. Yeah. That's a pretty fish. He's laying there in about 8 foot of water. Just kind of crawled it over one of them stumps, gave it a little twitch, and boy, did he inhale it. I don't know, once in a while they want it jumped, once in a while they want it crawled. That one just kind of wanted it jumped over that stump. Let's see if there's another one there. There we go. He caught me handcuffed, folks. That wasn't very nice of that bass. I'm going to show you exactly what happened in case you didn't catch that. And this is liable to happen to you when you're fishing. I'm pulling it back out just right there to make my next flip, and he grabs it. You've got two choices. Jerk like I did and hope you don't get all tangled up in the reel handle like I did. I got lucky. I still got him. Or if it's a big fish and he hits and you can tell it's a big fish, you're probably better off just to throw the line back at him, get down here, take a couple of cranks, and then get a good hook set to where you're back here and have more control over the fish. But you will see that happen when you are flipping. Once in a while when they're a little tentative about taking a bait, they'll wait until that bait starts to move away from the cover. And if they catch you like that, it can be pretty exciting at times. A nice fish. Don't be afraid to switch colors. I was fishing a black and chartreuse, what we call a tricolor jig, and getting a few strikes on it, but in this darker water I went to an even darker bait, the black and blue, and it seemed to make a difference on the number of bites. So that's why we carry a lot of different colors, a lot of different weights. Since I've moved out of the weeds into deeper water, I've gone to a heavier jig. When I was up in the weeds, I was fishing quarters and 3/8. Now that I've moved out in that 7 to 12 foot zone, I've gone to a 1/2 ounce jig where I can feel them stumps down there a little better, get down there a little faster where the fish are at, and utilize my time a little better. So be willing to experiment with color and experiment with the weight of the jigs, and you'll probably catch more fish on jigs more consistently. There's several different presentations we use to get the bait into these different areas, and one I want to start with is the actual flipping, and you know, what's enough line, what isn't enough line. I think an easy way to judge is just get a handful of line, hold it out beside you with the rod straight up, and have that bait about even with the reel. I think that's a good amount of line to work with. Now you're just dipping the rod down. You're getting that bait swinging. Just practice the swinging of the rod, the dipping of the rod. I'm left-handed, so I'm always using it with my left hand. If you're right-handed, then you're going to have to switch hands as the bait is actually falling. But once you get that motion down and get that bait swinging back and forth, Then you can see what I'm doing with this other hand. I've got the line sliding through my fingers. That's how you get the distance. Don't get in the habit of doing this. I see a lot of people flipping this way, where they're hanging onto the line. That's what I call dabbling. Bad things happen when you're hanging onto the line. You get a bite now, you're going to end up with a bad line cut. It's going to be wrapped around your reel handles. You're not going to get a good hook set. The end results are not going to be good. So practice this. Practice bringing this hand right back down to the reel. The reel's now engaged. I like to hang onto my line too, but I like to feel it right here in front of the reel. That's a very good place to help. It'll help you tell a little bit more about what your bait's doing, and you're also in position now to do two things. If you get the bite, you're in position to set the hook. If you don't get the bite, you're in position to bring the bait right back and make your next flip. Just letting it slide over those fingers. That's all there is to flipping. Very important not to try to reach out too far like that. If you overflip, now your line's tight, and if the fish hits, you can't get a good hook set. So what I try to do is when I make the flip, my rod tip's at that angle. Now I can follow the lure to the bottom, keeping slack line, just kind of following it down as it settles with the rod tip until it hits bottom, giving it a couple hops, bringing it right back. A very important key to flipping is keeping the boat the same distance from the bank or to the line of cover, the grass line, the boat dock, whatever it is you're fishing. Those of you that are good at boat control are going to be good at flipping. Those of you that aren't are going to have some problems. You're going to be too close and too far away. So it takes a little practice. I like to use a foot control trolling motor. Right now I'm using a 1224 Evinrude trolling motor on the front of my boat, which is very, very quiet. It allows me to sneak up on those fish and allows me to maneuver that boat without having to worry about steering it with my hand, where I can use both hands for the flipping technique. Very good technique in dirty water or heavy cover where you can get close to the fish. When you get into those clear water situations where you're going to scare them if you get right up on top of them and try to flip, or if the cover's a little sparse, or if you need to shoot it way up underneath a boat dock, then we go to the pitching technique rather than flipping. And where with the flipping we had the handful of line, now we don't do that. But we still have the bait about even with the reel. I think it's a good idea when you're first learning to pitch to maybe grab the back of your trailer just to help direct it a little bit, and you're just doing an underhand swing, just shooting it out. After a little practice, you'll become very good at this, letting the rod do the work. You're still keeping it low to the water where it doesn't make a loud splash. As you can see on some of the footage we shot today where we were skipping it underneath boat docks and that, you can get to a lot of places that most people can't get if you get real proficient at the actual pitching part. I even get to where I skip it right across the top of the water like that to shoot it underneath a target. You can develop a lot of distance. You get a lot more range than you do with actual flipping. You can see I can reach way over there with an underhand pitch. That's a long, usually I don't fish that far, but you can see if you combine flipping and pitching, how versatile you are in heavy cover fishing. There's not a hiding place a bass can get that you can't reach. One other little thing that you might like this to impress your friends. I don't know, I like to use this deal whenever there's a camera crew around, but once in a while we'll have overhanging trees or we'll have a boat dock above us where if we got this rod up here trying to flip or even trying to make some of those pitches, we're hitting the cover. I use a little roll cast. I get about 2 or 3 foot of line out, just make a little circle and shoot it off. And you can keep that rod tip down real low and make that little loop cast and shoot it in underneath that cover. That looks good. They'll impress your friends as long as you go the right way. You go the wrong way, you're liable to knock yourself out and look pretty silly. So keep in mind that you're just making a little loop with it. Just going in a circle, trying not to hit your rod, and then releasing the line at the right time, and that bait will just shoot off. So those little different casts will get you into those heavy cover places where those big bass live and are going to get you some excellent results. So we've talked a lot about the technique, the equipment, the different baits we use in flipping and pitching and jig fishing. But when should you do it? I think that's very important. What seasons are best? What weather conditions are best? And I think that's where a lot of anglers have a problem. They're trying to kind of force a technique when it's not really right. And I can maybe simplify that a little bit for you, and I don't always guess right either, but what I try to do is after real bad weather situations, cold fronts, etc., boy, I like to pick that flipping stick up and go to the heaviest cover I can find. I look at a bass like this, analyze where was he a week ago, where was he when you caught him last. If he was up on a shallow flat that didn't have any cover and you get a big old weather system come through, he's probably going to move deeper. He's going to drop into one of them creek channels, or if he backs off a point and suspends, he's going to be a hard fish to catch. But if you got some brush piles up there, flooded willow trees, grass beds, boat docks, whatever your cover example might be, he's just going to get tight to that cover, and I'm going to be able to catch him with the flipping and pitching technique because of the cold front, rather than letting it defeat me. Sunshiny days are also excellent flipping situations because they force those bass tighter to cover. Then I'm trying to get into those shady spots. I'm always analyzing what's the weather doing to the fish. I'm also looking at the water temperature. Springtime of the year, fall of the year, and on into the winter, those colder water months are normally when a higher percentage of fish are shallow, especially the bigger fish, and around them shallow water targets that are conducive to good flipping and pitching. Once in a while on some lakes during the summertime, you can have a good flipping and pitching bait, but spring and fall are your two prime months for it, so also keep that in mind. Dirty water conditions are a plus versus clear water conditions. In dirty water, you normally have a better flipping and pitching bite. It also pertains to what's the water level doing. If a lake's dropping, normally the flipping and pitching bite is not near as good as if the lake's rising. A rising lake, I would get to the bank and I would pick that jig up or the lizard or whatever the bait may be, put it on one of these long rods and get to hunting for that heavy cover, and I think you're going to catch more fish. So analyze the season, analyze the water temperature, analyze the water color, just analyze everything you can and put all these pieces of the puzzle together, and I think you'll have a better idea when to pick this up and when to lay it down and try something else. The question a lot of people have is exactly how do I work the jig? Well, when I make my initial presentation, I always let it go straight to the bottom on a slack line, following it down with the rod, or if I'm in deeper water, then I'll feed line out as it settles down until it gets to the bottom. And then I think it's the most critical part, and I think this is where a lot of people make their mistake, especially with the new rattling baits on the market, because they're in such a hurry to get that bait shaking and making noise. I think a lot of times they pull it right out of the fish's mouth. So as that lure's falling, you watch if the line twitches, moves sideways, does anything wrong, stops falling before it gets to the bottom, I think you should go ahead and jerk. If your bait's made it to the bottom and you've had no indication that you've had a strike, the best tip I can give you is really be careful when you pick that bait up. Don't get in a hurry to get that rattle sounded. You need to weigh that bait. Have an awareness level of what that bait should feel like. As you go to pick up on it, so many of your jig bites are just going to feel like, man, there's moss on it, there's a leaf on it. That's some of the biggest bass you're ever going to have bite you, you're never going to feel. It's just going to be a little added weight. And if I go to pick up and that jig's heavier than it should be, I drop that rod tip down so that I've got slack in my line, take a couple of cranks, and jerk straight up. Well, usually keeping the rod underneath my arm for leverage. And I only jerk one time. I think if you jerk correct the first time, you want to keep your line tight. This 2 or 3 hook set deal, I don't think is a good deal. Jerk once, jerk hard. You got that heavy line, it's not going to break. Keep the line tight. A lot of times I'll take it to my side then to keep the fish from jumping. Especially in tournament competition, I don't like to see them jump because that's when a lot of them can shake the bait and get loose. So I'll try to keep the rod tip a little lower. If you're just out fun fishing and you don't care whether he gets off and you like to see him jump, like we do for a video once in a while, then you can have it up high. But keep the rod position in the right place when you go to set the hook and be aware of how heavy that jig feels. If you pick up on it and it feels too light, he may have it and be coming at you. They do that a lot of times. They'll grab it and come at the boat and you pick up and you can't find your jig. Boy, crank up and catch up with that bait and then set the hook. If I pick up on it and it feels like it should, that's when I'll get there and jump it up and down, get that rattle to working. Make that rattle work for you to attract those fish, and then bring it out of the cover and make that pitch or that flip right into the next target and go through the same process all over again. I'm trying to put it in as many places during a day's time that I possibly can where I think they might live, and I'm always hunting for that subtle strike. Jig fishing's not easy, but it can be the best way I know of to catch the biggest bass of your life.
There's another one. Yeah, oh, there's a good fish. Yes. Oh, are we having fun now? I hate my job. This job just isn't any fun. Whoa. Yeah, darling. You're too big. You're too big. Come on board. Yes. What a nice fish. Let's go get another one. We don't have time to mess around. They are biting now. This could be in every cast spot. Once in a while you'll find a place like that where you barely get it in there, another one's got it. Get that school turned on and keep them turned on. There we go again. Yeah, all right. We got them biting. What gets the rest of them excited? If you can get that school excited, you can just really catch some fish.
Once in a while, the jig isn't the right choice of baits, whether you're flipping or pitching or casting, so you need some options, and the natural options are going to plastic worms and lizards. We can go to the extremes, which I'm going to show a few of them, but probably my second choice right after the jig would be the lizard, especially during the spawning season. For some reason, fish on targets, they just hate lizards, and you're going to generate a lot more strikes with a plastic lizard than you will with a jig at times. So don't be afraid to put it on. And what I'm doing is I like this type of bullet sinker. It's got the little screw-in deal there. The favorite weight would be anywhere from a 3/16 to a ½ ounce. This particular one's a 3/8. And the hook, I like a straight shank hook. If you can see that right there, that's a style of hook that I want to go flipping with. And with your flipping hooks, you need a fairly sturdy hook, because you're using a heavy line and you got to get those fish out of heavy cover. I've recently come out with this new flipping hook right here. This is one of the smaller sizes, but Mustad's helped me develop that, and it's got vanadium steel in it. It's a very, very strong hook and makes an excellent flipping hook. So you might find that choice on the market, and it'll be labeled as a flipping hook. But with the lizard, I'm just threading it through the head, down about, just starting around the bend. And then pop it out, slide it on up, pop the line in there, thread it around, move the bait up a little bit, and just slide it down and work it a little bit in there. Make a channel and just get that point so it's barely touching through. Then I'll slide that slip sinker down. And the neat thing about it, you can screw that slip sinker right into the head of the lizard. So now that you've got a compact bait. And if you pull it over a branch and it gets to that position, your sinker doesn't go sliding down here and go tink to where you think you got a bite. It's just like a jig now because it's compact. Years ago, I used to toothpick that slip sinker so it'd stay next to my piece of plastic, but now with these new type of bullet weights, you don't have to do that. That's a neat combination, and that's how I rig it. That's very weedless. It'll come through all types of heavy cover. When I am fishing that lizard around those spawning areas and flipping and pitching it, these are three of my favorite color choices. If the water's a little on the clear side, I like to go with the watermelon color. A little dirtier, I like this, what we call green pumpkin, or dark pumpkin, some people call it. That's a good choice. Another good choice is what we call pumpkin with this bright green flake. Those three are probably my favorite choices when it comes to the lizards. Something else that'll get you a lot of bites when you want to downsize is just taking a regular crawdad and forget putting it on behind a jig. Texas rig it, just like I did that lizard, and you can catch a lot of fish flipping it by itself. In fact, for some people, that is their #1 flipping bait, just Texas rigging a crawdad. Some other popular worms, and I want to talk a little bit about worms because there's so many different choices out there, I think it gets confusing. And I'm going to lay just a few of my favorites out here to where you can look at them, and I can show you where I use them and why. Okay. Right here, see how we have the hook tail on those two worms? Those are great flipping worms in dirtier water because as they fall, they put out a lot of pressure waves to help attract fish. If I'm fishing vegetation, then I probably want a bait that's not so dominant, a little subtler in the water, and I like these ribbon-type tail worms. I will be flipping them down through the grass. They come through the vegetation better. They'll come through bulrushes. That's how I decide what worm I'm using. Color-wise, the June bugs, the red shads, those are all popular colors, but it's just what you got confidence in. Normally, if you're confused about color, you can go to a dark color like a June bug, a black grape, or just a straight black worm and catch a lot of fish in all different watercolor situations. Worms allow you to do, it's unlimited what you can do color-wise. That's what the manufacturers like about it. That's why you got 200 pounds of them. You don't need them all. For some of you folks on the clearer water areas, certain parts of the country where fishing is real hard and you're not fishing for those giant fish, I realize you do have to downsize baits. And a logical choice is going to the little 4-inch ringworm type bait or to the tube baits, your Gets-It type baits. Those are great choices. You can rig them weedless. You can pitch them into the same places we're pitching the bigger baits. There are numbers bait. They'll get you more bites. You probably need to fish them on a little bit lighter line, and therefore your odds go up of breaking off a big fish if you do get a bite. But at times when fishing's real tough, you do need to downsize and you do need to go to baits like that. So give those a try also. The more I'm in this business, the more I also learn. I can look back a couple of years ago in one of the Pro-Am tournaments where I'm flipping boat docks and pitching a jig and flipping it around the piers of the boat docks, and I'm having a good tournament. I'm catching quite a few fish. And the amateur I drew for the last day of the tournament, I've got a chance to win my side, he's got a chance to win his side, and he asked me, he says, gosh, I don't want to flip a jig behind you. I know you're going to catch all the jig fish. He says, what do you think I should do? I says, well, I would give those fish a different look. I would flip and pitch a spinner bait around those piers after I fished a jig, and maybe that different look will generate some strikes. Well, not only did it generate some strikes, after about an hour, he had me fishing a spinner bait, and we both ended up having a good tournament. I like to shorten the shaft on the spinner bait just a little bit. It makes it drop better. The type of blade I like is just as Indiana style or a Colorado style, always using just one blade. I don't like two blades on there because they don't flutter as well going to the bottom. As far as the head of the spinner bait, my favorite weights are anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 ounce, with 3/8 probably being the best all-around choice. And I'm either putting a plastic split tail on behind it or going back to one of them white pigtail pork trailers that I use on the jig. And that makes a dynamite drop bait. Don't be afraid to put it underneath boat docks, underneath overhanging limbs, or pumping it down beside a laying down log. And it's going to get you a lot of good strikes.
Ah, there he is. Oh, come right off that stick. Come here. Oh, man. Whoa, want to get back in where he was. That's a beauty. See how that little stick's coming through them weeds? He was laying right underneath the shadow of that. There you go. Go back and join your buddies. Boy, this is a good morning for fishing. This is fabulous. They are really aggressive, biting the bait good. He just took off streaking for deep water. And that's what a lot of them will do. A little technique I try once in a while that I think works real good, especially in the fall period of the year, and really a key place is around boat docks, but once in a while along the edge of the weeds like what we have here, it can be productive too, or even along willow trees and bushes. And that's the swimming technique of a jig. Most of the time we're letting it go straight to the bottom, hop it a couple times and bring it out, but you can actually take that jig, make your pitch out there, never let it go to the bottom, keep the rod about in this position, and just keep it swimming along, just kind of moving like that through the water, and it kind of looks like a bait fish. The key is not getting the rod too high. If you get the rod up here, you don't have any room to set the hook. If you get the rod way down here as you're swimming it, he's got too tight a line and he can't inhale that bait real good. So the proper place to keep it, I feel, when you're swimming it, is about in this position right here, to where you got a lot of room to set the hook if he does hit it. And I always kind of like to keep the rod against my body. In other words, to this side right here, because I've got more leverage with my arm. If I'm on the other side like this doing it, he can pull me a lot better and I can't get as much force on the hook set. So I try to fish against my body as much as I can like that when I'm... Something you might check if you do get into a situation where your jig's continually getting hung up on you. Once in a while after you catch a few fish, you will start to flex your hook up. And if that happens, you're going to get hung up quite a bit. I'm not a believer in opening my hook up. Some people do that right off the bat. They take a pliers and bend the hook up a little bit. They think they're going to catch a higher percentage of fish. And I don't agree with that. I want that hook perfectly parallel with the shank of it. I think it's got better hook penetration that way. But what will happen is after you catch a dozen fish or so, this weed guard is going to get weaker and weaker, and you're suddenly going to get hung up with that jig more and more. So I'll take that weed guard and I'll flex it back towards the head, towards the line tie, and that puts more memory in it. It makes it stiffer again, and it'll keep you from getting hung up, make the bait easier to fish with. There! Boy, look at that fish! Oh, man, that was neat. I saw him actually take the bait. Come here. You want to jump one more time? I didn't think so. That was a neat deal. That bait didn't settle 4 inches under the water. Just whoosh. I don't know whether you could see it on the camera, but man, what an aggressive fish that was. That's why it's so important to be in position to set that hook. The minute it hits the water, boom, that's when he hit. Gosh, that's one thing about this shallow water flipping. Things can happen in a hurry. That was a neat deal. In the near future, we're going to introduce another video. It's going to be another kind of how-to, but we're going to use my son, Chad. He recently graduated from the University of Missouri with a degree in fisheries and wildlife, and he's now out fishing full-time as a professional fisherman. And I know I've gone to a few of his seminars and listened to him, and he's got a totally different perspective on bass fishing because of that wildlife and fisheries degree. He understands why they do certain things, the weather behind it, the different colors, the sound factors, what colors, why they work so good in certain different color water. And I think in that video that he's going to do, it's really going to open your eyes to some of the scientific end of bass fishing. I've always had theories about why they do things. He's actually put it into words and explained to me why some of my theories do work. So I think that's going to be a really neat feature, and we're looking forward to when he does get that shot. That wasn't very nice of that bass. There's one. Whoa! Got him right in the rook. Fish on? Oh, we are having fun now. Come on, jump again for the camera. We don't care if you get away. We're going to let you go anyway. Come on. Oh, you're too big. As you can see, flipping, pitching, and deep water jigging can be a lot of fun. If you've had as much fun watching this as I've had making it, gosh, I need to quit. I need to go home. This is too much fun.
At Getaway Productions, we have observed that most of our seminar viewers approach bass fishing intelligently and with experience. The problem for most of us is that making a living definitely interferes with bass fishing. Darn it, ain't it so? The pros' profession is bassing. They simply have more time to gain experience. An opportunity to see techniques and results learned from their vast experiences is what we offer you. At Getaway, we have every confidence that our viewers can adapt what they see to their knowledge and for their own benefit. After all, as it has been said, why hide your eyes when you can, well, you know what I mean. I'm Richard Folmer, voice of Getaway. For more in-depth information and instructional tips, get our 60-minute videos. Pick your topic or favorite pro and order. Good bassin'.